Hi, my name is George Haas, and I am the founding teacher of Mettagroup. Mettagroup is a meditation community which has a strong focus on attachment and attachment repair. I got sober myself in 1978 in 12-step in New York, and I noticed about that particular way of being was that you made this commitment to sobriety above all things, which meant that if you found opportunities that were going to threaten your sobriety, then the solution to that was simply not to take those opportunities, which is a fine approach to maintaining sobriety. But then we also have the human condition where we really want to be living lives that are full of meaning. And if taking risks for meaning would threaten the sobriety, then you would pass up on the risks for meaning, which wasn't actually so successful for me in the sense that I didn't have a life that was meaningful enough. And so the point of sobriety was lost in some sense. So then I decided to explore different things, and I went into therapy, I went into meditation, all in an attempt to make it so that it was possible to pursue the things that were going to be meaningful to me and at the same time maintain my sobriety. Now, as it turned out, it wasn't such a bad bet because I've been sober and clean and also managed to deal with a lot of the process addictions I've had for 45 years, so it's not so bad. Process addictions are the other stuff like sex and drugs and danger and money and all of the other things that you can get wrapped up in. So the first direction I went in was psychotherapy. I thought I could resolve some of these issues in psychotherapy, and over the course of my life I ended up having 28 years of psychotherapy. And while that made it a lot better, it didn't resolve the same repeating pattern of my life. If I were to describe it, it would be a lot of beginnings, some I would even say brilliant, some middles, and almost no finishes, because the difficulty in interpersonal relationships would get so bad that I couldn't sustain participation in the different projects I involved myself in. I got to the end of psychotherapy mainly about 20 years ago or so, and really was told that you've done an amazing job, you've made amazing progress. Now what you're going to have to do is adapt to how it is and the limitations that the kind of childhood conditioning you had have imposed on your life. One of my psychotherapists said to me, "It's like your parents cut your legs off. What are you going to do? Sit there and hope they grow back, or are you going to get on with it?" It was always, well, what if this isn't actually good enough to find meaning in life? What do I do then? And so it's at that point that I turned deeply into meditation. And meditation did provide a lot of solutions, particularly around the mentalizing and emotional regulation aspect that we need in order to function better. And I did stabilize my life in a lot of ways. I could hold on to a job. I could, for the most part, keep myself from being evicted from the places I was trying to live. But it didn't afford me the intimate relationships or the capacity to pursue things that were really meaningful. It's then that I discovered the attachment experience, and really what became apparent to me that the attachment conditioning that organized my emotional life around auto-regulating, which is where we regulate ourselves independent of other people, was the main driver for the addiction process, the main driver for the disruptions in relationships, which led to the disruption in work relationships, which led into the not finishing anything. And so I began to address in my own personal meditation practice the addiction strategies. But I also was involved in a meditation community where 60 or 70% of the people also had the addiction issues, and it was quite apparent that the general approach to meditation was not going to be specific enough to address the needs of people who also had addiction. And so I began to teach meditation classes that were oriented around understanding the dynamics of addiction from an attachment perspective, which is largely an avoidant attachment strategy. And then those classes became interesting to different treatment facilities, and so I taught for 12 years in different treatment facilities and really got a sense of what was needed in order to offer a solution to to offer a meditation-based solution to attachment conditioning for the group of people that have addiction issues. And so that's how our meditation and addiction developed. In organized attachment, the group that has the most or is most commonly addicted is the dismissing group. And the childhood of dismissing people is a childhood of profound neglect. But it's also a childhood where you're required to idealize the family life and idealize your caregivers and strip out all presentation or expression of negative experience. And so that particular group, it's about 20% of the population are dismissing. 30% of that 20% have addiction issues, and they mostly think of their childhood as having been ideal or perfect. Disorganized people, 70% of disorganized people have addiction issues, and 32% of the general population is disorganized, so that's the largest group of addicts. Their childhoods are usually frightening and chaotic and disturbing, and so they have a sense that their childhood was difficult. But what they don't tend to do is normalize it against secure family systems, because their lack of reliability precludes them from having relationships with secure people. So they mainly have relationships with other disorganized people. So when you're comparing one horrible childhood to another horrible child, it seems pretty normal. If you were to compare it to a childhood of somebody who grew up to be secure, you'd see how extreme it was. But mostly in the context of the relationships that they have, it's not so different than the other people's childhood, so it seems normal. The thing with people who grow up to have addiction issues is that they never really move beyond the auto-regulating strategy. For dismissing people, nobody comes to regulate them. Nobody comes to take care of them. And so they grow up with a habit of regulating themselves independent of other people. And disorganized people, because they're often frightened of other people and frightened of their caregivers, they don't develop a system where they can regulate with other people because they're too frightened to do it. So they withdraw also from co-regulating with other people into an auto-regulating system. The auto-regulating system, while it may work in childhood, eventually, as you move into the adult frame, the intensities of feelings are so great that most of the time just activities or process addictions or food isn't enough, and so then you turn towards substances, painkillers or alcohol, in order to manage the intense negative emotional experiences that you have. The other aspect of this is that organized dismissing people tend to suppress awareness of their emotions, so they're not even aware that they're in a difficult emotional state, and so often they don't have an explanation for why they're using substances in the way that they do. Once you get into substance addiction, you also activate the tolerance factor. So the original dose that was regulating, because the body adjusts to it, isn't as regulating, and so you have to up the dose. And so upping the dose, of course, triggers the tolerance. That upped dose, while it works temporarily, doesn't work for that long, and then you have to up the dose. And as soon as the dose is so high that it interferes with your capacity to function in an ordinary way, you begin to have outside pressures that ask you to look at your consumption of substances, and that's actually when people enter into seeking treatment for it, when there's enough outside pressure on them because the dosages are so high that it interferes with their capacity to function. So what we have to do is address the either the dismissing attachment or the disorganized attachment. Because disorganized attachment is the most common expression in the addiction treatment world, we accommodate the way that we teach this for the disorganized person. We find that the organized, dismissing person doesn't mind so much. And so it's a much more hands-on process. We do the level 1, which is an introduction to all of this material, but the level 2 process for people with addiction is much more intensive, and we don't let you go more than a day or two without some continuation of the instruction, so you don't have to carry the emotional reaction to it for very long. We have particular meditation tracks that are designed to open up or repair the different aspects of development that need to be repaired. So if we look at this from a mentalizing frame, avoidant people have a particular pattern of mentalizing, over-monitoring, very self-oriented, very internally oriented, very cognitive. And so we focus on developing the mentalizing skills that are absent, but also in reducing the hyperactivity of the mentalizing strategies that they're currently using so that you can come back into balance. We ask you to change your mind about the reliability of other people and to try again to enter into collaborative relationships, but also understand we're not asking you to take your old skill set and try and form collaborative relationships. We're teaching you the skill set of collaborative relationships so that you can take a whole new skill set into the relational field to begin to develop relationships that are actually going to support you. And then we have you focus on exploration and begin to discover the things that matter to you. One of the characteristics of dismissing people's childhood is what mattered to them didn't matter to their caregivers. We develop intentional positivity in association with the self so that when the self experience arises, it's not that awful low self-esteem that you just hate having over and over again. It's this positive experience of yourself, a delight in who you are, which really changes everything. There's actually no conflict at all between this. You use this as an augmentation. We would call it a use of the 11th step in the 12-step world. Sought through conscious contact to improve your relationship with God, and then looked for help from every avenue. I'm a big believer in getting help from every avenue you can get the help from. But our program is not something that you have to believe in. We really are experiential, and we want you to do the practices, and we want you to take on the concepts, and the things that work for you, embrace and add, and the things that don't, just don't think about them again. And then once you really touch into the nature of the attachment conditioning that leads to the use of substances and process addictions, and you begin to develop the skill sets that are necessary to move out of it into collaborative relationship systems, this really resolves itself mostly. We have workshops that are about an hour and a half long where we talk about how attachment is the underlying cause of addiction and what needs to happen about that. Then we have a level 1 series, which is 3 half-day longs, where we go through our 4 modules. So the first module is craving and urging, which is understanding the automatic process of the impulse to use. The second module is stress, anger, and depression, which is really addressing the thought-based emotional regulation system that addicts typically use, which produce strong afflictive emotions as a way of regulating, and learning to replace those with beneficial strategies that produce a different emotional experience. The third one is persistent negative emotions, Persistent negative emotions are somaticized emotional experiences. You may have heard them talked about, where when the emotional system is overloaded, which happens ordinarily when you use bad strategies to regulate, then you end up storing emotion in the body. The main problem with that is that it consumes so much energy to store the emotion in the body that it detracts from the rest of your life. Because you don't have the energy to participate in it. And when you go through the process of releasing that, the energy that comes back is then something that you can employ in making your life better. And it is an astonishing amount of energy. And the fourth one is difficult interpersonal relationships. And here we look at the dynamics of attachment conditioning and how you form relationships, educate around secure functioning relationships, and also around exploration. One of the chronic issues in people with addiction, because they're so used to socially isolating, is that their lives are overtaken by a despair that there's no meaning in anything. And so what we want to teach is how to explore for meaning so that your life becomes a rich experience of you pursuing the things that really matter to you. And in understanding that cycle of exploration, we go out with emotional support and able to regulate ourselves well, find the thing that has meaning to us, but then we come back to the group of people that we have around us and we express to them what we've discovered and what it means to us. And that exchange of discovery and expression is the thing that really drives a sense of meaning. A lot of the recovery community is oriented around abstinence only, certainly the 12-step world. And the problem with disorganization in attachment and addiction is that often without some intervention into the attachment system, abstinence only is not a realistic choice, not a realistic possibility. So we're a abstinence and harm reduction community. We don't kick you out. We don't kick you out. We don't end our involvement with you if you lapse. In fact, it's fairly ordinary that people lapse. One of the things about addiction is that you use again. Why would that be a penalty if that's the condition? And so what we want you to do is begin the process of developing the mentalizing and emotional regulation, which is what you're going to need in order to lapse less frequently, let's say. Substances abstinence only is a good idea, but harm reduction is better for a lot of the process addictions. You can't actually do an abstinence only on food. You have to eat, 3 times a day. So how do you work with that? A lot of people have sex addiction. Do you really want a life where there's no sex? We're human beings. We live in a human body. That's part of this gathering of meaning. So we need to learn to relate to the activity in a way that doesn't result in auto-regulating, which is really the basis of this. A lot of people have difficult relationships with money. For instance, you don't make enough money, so you can't explore, but you can justify yourself the fact that you're not exploring because you haven't made money, but you won't look at why you don't participate enough to make money. Or you go the other direction and you just make money, you don't do anything else. And you justify that to yourself, and it lets you off the hook from exploration because you have to gather. You have to gather in a state of fearfulness around that. And so we look at that whole picture. But we don't demand of you abstinence only. What we demand of you is that you look at your whole pattern of addiction. So if you're curious about attachment and you're curious about meditation, if you're curious about enlightenment, take a look at our website and then reach out to us. So we are happy to actually talk to you one-on-one, explain what we might have for you.